Next on the American Muscle Car, in 1968, Plymouth asked the world what happens when you blend big horsepower with a little cartoon character. You get a Roadrunner. It had been a wild 4 years since the first muscle car, this 1964 GTO, had appeared on the automotive scene. Wild for car buyers, whose muscle car dreams were coming true in the showrooms across the land. And wild for the car companies, who were turning out more and more of these great cars every year. But somewhere along the way, the original muscle car idea had gotten lost. Putting top-of-the-line engines in low-cost cars had created this phenomenon, but the car makers' scramble to load these cars up with style and comfort options had by now inflated some muscle cars' price tags to over $4,000. With muscle cars selling like hotcakes, nobody noticed that they were becoming a little fat and a little pricey.
Well, as the muscle car market moved through the 60s, it picked up a pretty good price tag. The Mopars, you had the Belvedere GTX, you had Coronet RT, and they were not cheap. And you know, there was a prestige factor going at work here too. And Mopar was the first one to really identify the market for a low buck, no frills, maximum bang for the buck muscle car.
This is the 1968 Plymouth Roadrunner, and it's one of the most important cars of the entire muscle era. The Roadrunner is important because it took the muscle car movement back to its roots. Plymouth's goal was to create a car that would run 100 miles per hour in the quarter-mile drags and sell it for under $3,000. For Mopar fans, it was a gift from muscle car heaven. It wasn't that Chrysler Corporation didn't already build fast cars. Far from it. Mopars were standout performers on every racetrack, from Daytona to Bonneville. In drag racing, the Max Wedge cars and the mighty 426 Hemis were nearly unbeatable. Chrysler's big engines and these lightweight bodies made beautiful race cars. But to the gang at the drive-in, it wasn't enough to be fast. You had to look fast, too.
You take the 67 GTX, for example, tremendous car, fast car, you know, beautifully executed. They couldn't sell it because it didn't have an image, okay? And marketing and packaging your muscle car, it had to have image.
So in 1968, Plymouth gambled that the original muscle car premise was still valid and created a muscle car that followed this formula to the letter. They took their redesigned Satellite, stripped it of practically everything but 4 tires and a steering wheel, and put in a heated-up version of the old reliable 383 cubic inch power plant. Then they stuck a price tag on it that just about anybody could afford. Plymouth knew they had to build image into the car, so they came up with maybe the best marketing gimmick of the muscle era. They named the car after a little bird from a popular Saturday morning cartoon that scorches the asphalt as he blows the doors off the coyote. It was sheer genius. We'll see how Plymouth made this little bird roar like a tiger when the American muscle car returns. The '68 Roadrunner was a bold step for Chrysler Corporation, a company best known for lavish automobiles. Despite their reputation as a luxury car builder, Chrysler was into performance in a big way. Chrysler's emphasis was clearly on performance, but America's definition of performance car in those days was the full-size, top-of-the-line big boat, with all the bells and whistles and a price tag to match.
These bucket seats, for example, are the most comfortable we've ever built. They cradle and support the body, and yet don't trap you. And of course, up front, a tachometer that is so important to high-performance cars.
Detroit and the whole world knew that going fast cost money. The more you wanted to spend, the faster you could go. And this is how things were until 1964.
Plymouth and Dodge and just about everybody in the industry had watched Pontiac just blow right by him with the GTO. The concept of a packaged muscle car was something that no one else had ever done before Pontiac had in 1964. Sure, people had put 409 engines in or 413s, but they weren't a package where it was all put together with one nameplate and sold that way. Pontiac did that in 1964. And it was extremely successful, and it took the other people in the industry a little while to understand what the concept was and how important it was.
The GTO started a rush among the car companies to make cars which appealed to the youth market. Fortunately for Ford and General Motors, they had intermediate body styles which were both inexpensive and sporty looking, both qualities necessary to attract the young buyer. But Chrysler didn't have any sporty intermediate cars. Instead, they had an endless parade of business coupes and land yachts. Engine power, the essential muscle car ingredient, was no problem. With a Hemi or a 426 Max Wedge, a Plymouth Belvedere could walk all over a stock GTO or SS Chevelle. But no matter how fast it went, the Belvedere just wasn't a cool car.
You just couldn't stick a motor in a car and say, well, here it is, guys. You know, the youth market really gravitated toward excitement. And if the car wasn't exciting, they weren't going to buy it.
The situation clearly called for something outrageous. What could be more outrageous than a best bang for the buck street racer with an irresistible hook? The legendary street battle between the cute little Roadrunner and the mean old Coyote. The car was the epitome of the factory hot rod, and people loved it immediately.
They made two styles. Mine is called the coupe because it has the post, and they made a hardtop. Those were the only two styles. The other thing that was unique about them is most of them came with no carpeting in them. They were very basic. The 4-speed was not an option. The 4-speed was standard. And if you wanted an automatic, I've got the original window sticker on it, you paid $39 more for the automatic. That sounds crazy to say that, but it's true.
In base form, you got a bench seat, you got a rubber floor mat, you got a taxi cab, basically, with a little trim on it, and either a 383 or a 426 Hemi motor. I mean, it was all seriousness. There was no puff here.
Inside the Roadrunner, you discovered just how Spartan a stripped-down Plymouth Belvedere could be. The rear side windows didn't even roll down. They popped out on little hinges. Plymouth brought the car in for $2,870, $130 under their $3,000 target price. In one bold stroke, Plymouth had solved their identity problem with young America and had slid right into a market niche full of hungry muscle car buyers. They had literally reinvented the muscle car. When the American muscle car returns, we'll see the other reason the Roadrunner was such an immediate hit: huge horsepower. By the middle of the 1968 model year, there were thousands of Roadrunners beeping their way up and down America's cruising boulevards. Young people had taken to this car like they had taken to Saturday morning cartoons. The Roadrunner's philosophy of keep it simple extended to the available engines. Plymouth's standard Roadrunner motor was their old reliable 383, but with a few welcome enhancements. Large port heads from the 440, a beefier valve train, and a special 450 lift cam made 335 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 410 foot-pounds of torque at 3,600 RPM with a single-carter AVS carburetor. Following the classic Mopar style of big engine, light body, the 383 equipped Roadrunner was most pleasing to the lead-footed segment of the buying public. But when it came to muscle car engines, the rule was bigger is better. So Plymouth decided to offer just one alternative engine, the 426 Hemi. There was no more revered engine in motorsports than the mighty Chrysler Hemi. It had propelled stockers, dragsters, sports cars, and even Indy-style race cars into the winner's circle since 1951. With its reappearance on the street in 1965, a Hemi badge on your car's fender got you instant respect.
The 383 with 335 horsepower was your base engine. The only optional engine in '68 was the 426 Hemi. The street Hemi, of course, was literally the king at the time of the street. There was really nothing that could touch it. A Hemi, automatic, in a Roadrunner was a very, very fast car.
The 426 Street Hemi used a 4.25-inch bore and a 3.75-inch stroke, and Chrysler rated this engine at 425 horsepower at 5,000 RPM and 490 foot-pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM. The Hemi in the Roadrunner was the ultimate street weapon in 1968. In its low-key Plymouth satellite body, this little bird behaved more like a wolf, prowling the street, ready to pounce on its prey. Plymouth knew the base model stripped-down Roadrunner wouldn't suit everyone's tastes, so the car's short option list did include a few comfort and appearance items. For $355, your Roadrunner could have air conditioning. For another $94 each, power steering and power brakes. Stereo tape with AM radio was priced at $195, and cruise control would set you back $53. But cruise wasn't available with the Hemi. Plymouth obviously figured that the only cruise control anyone needed with the Hemi was a heavy foot. Even the dress-up stuff, so vital to the muscle car image, was optional on the Roadrunner. Sport stripes cost $15, and a blackout hood treatment was an additional $18. The only adornment that came with the base model was the little Roadrunner on each door and the tail, and of course, the horn. By mid-year 1968, the Roadrunner had become so popular that Plymouth expanded the line to include a two-door hardtop. Almost 45,000 Roadrunners sold that first year, a fantastic success for a simple sedan built around a little cartoon bird and a big engine. Plymouth went into 1969 with great momentum and a plan to make the Roadrunner more attractive and even faster. We'll tell you that story when we return on the American Muscle Car. The '68 Roadrunner's popularity told Plymouth that they were doing it right with this car. So for 1969, they decided not to fix what wasn't broken. The '69 Roadrunner had even less shiny trim. The stainless steel tail panel on the '68s was deleted for '69, and the only other exterior change was a slight grille redesign. Along with the Roadrunner's success came an increased price tag for 1969. Base Roadrunner coupes now stickered for $29.45. The two-door hardtops sold for $30.83, and the all-new convertible came in at $33.13. Even with the price increases, Plymouth was still giving the muscle car crowd the biggest bang for the buck.
Basically, they were a muscle car to go fast. People didn't want power windows, they didn't want power steering, they didn't want power brakes. Anything that came off the engine, they didn't want to do it.
Plymouth was pouring engineering into this car. The Roadrunner featured heavy-duty brakes and suspension, wider tires and wheels, and sure grip differentials. The 4-speed and torque-flight automatic transmissions used in the Roadrunner were the beefiest in Chrysler's inventory. Under the hood, Plymouth added the romping 375-horse, 440 cubic-inch wedge engine with a trio of Holley 2-barrel carburetors. Dubbed the 446-pack, this engine was one of the fastest street power plants ever offered in the Mopar Intermediates. The Street Hemi was still king of the jungle, even though its cost inflated the price of a '69 Roadrunner by more than $800.
In stock form, a strong Hemi could run through the quarter mile in low 13s. And if you wanted to tune it and tweak it, you could get it down into the 11s without losing a lot of street ability.
The Roadrunner opened the door for a parade of theme cars like Pontiac's Judge and Ford's Fairlane Cobra. Both cars attempted to copy the Roadrunner's formula of low-cost, high-visibility horsepower. Ford left no question in anyone's mind as to who they were going after with the Fairlane. The one place from which Plymouth didn't expect competition was their own corporation. Over in the next building, the Dodge boys were busy working on a low-buck, high-concept rocket ship of their own, based on the Coronet. They used the same mega-horsepower 440s and 426 Hemis, put bumblebee stripes around its tail, and called it Super Bee.
This is a version of the Roadrunner. It's the Dodge version of the Roadrunner. I bought this car in 1984 from my father, who bought it originally in Beckley, West Virginia. The car, when we originally bought it, had 20,150 miles on it. I basically raced the car from 1984 on up to about 1995, strictly as a drag car. I kept all the original parts to the car, and in 1995, I decided to return the car back to its original condition. It takes me back to when my father actually had one of these, and it's just a time of my life I'll never forget, and I'll always remember it. That's why I have this car.
Super Bees were only offered in two-door coupes and hardtops, and base models had sticker prices under $3,000. To go with the big horsepower, Dodge included the rally suspension and bigger brakes, but unfortunately for Dodge, they just couldn't figure out a way for the horn to buzz. The Super Bee was a very limited production car and didn't eat into the Roadrunner's sales at all. Roadrunner was by far the success story of the industry. 1970 was the peak of the muscle car years. More horsepower, more wild graphics and paint schemes, more of everything. Plymouth already had all its cards on the table with the Roadrunner, since they decided from day one to go with the Hemi, and from day two to offer the 440 six-pack. So for 1970, they did the only thing they could do. They made the car more beautiful. We'll be back with the fabulous 70 Roadrunner. After the success of 1968 and 1969, it was hard to see how Plymouth could improve on the Roadrunner. One look at the 1970 and you had your answer. A more sculptured shape graced the sides of the car, with stylish scoops forward of the rear wheel openings. The grille and tail panel underwent their first real upgrades. The redesigned grille was actually a more effective air intake to help cool the big Chrysler engines. The little bird still adorned the car from its sides and tail, and the car still went as it dusted off its competition. Added to the underhood lineup was a new engine for 1970, the 440 Commando with a single Carter AVS 4-barrel. This engine produced 350 tire-burning horsepower without all the maintenance of the six-pack carburation system, and at a lower price. The Commando 440 added $234 to the Roadrunner's bottom line, compared to the 440 six-pack's $250 and the hefty $841 upcharge for the Hemi. Plymouth also did something unheard of for 1970. They rolled back the Roadrunner's prices to just about 1968 levels. A base model two-door coupe stickered for $28.96. The hardtop cost $30.34, and the convertible sold for $32.89. And for that, Plymouth now threw in carpeting. It was an unbeatable deal. Thanks to the momentum from the Roadrunner, the Super Bee, and the whole lineup of the Mopar muscle machines, Chrysler was on an incredible roll. Their designers made the entire era memorable with all their wild colors and graphics. Colors like Plum Crazy, Go Mango, Sublime, Banana, Hemi Orange, and all the rest are symbols of the muscle car era at its height. But there is no more striking symbol of the muscle car than the Superbird.
Watch the most exciting finish in history as Leroy Yarborough comes from behind to win it in the last 3/4 of a mile.
Ford and Mercury had sneaked up on Chrysler in 1969 with their new super speedway cars, the Torino Talladega and the Cyclone Spoiler. These cars were made to run on the NASCAR high banks and were several miles an hour faster because of their aerodynamics. Plymouth had even lost their ace, Richard Petty, to Ford in 1969. Plymouth's solution was typical Mopar: go big or stay home. To qualify under NASCAR rules, Plymouth made 1,920 Superbirds, an average of one car for every 2 Plymouth dealerships in the U.S. With a price tag of over $4,300, they were well outside the Roadrunner's magic $3,000 target. But these cars had one purpose in life: to put Plymouth back in the winner's circle. And they succeeded. They lasted 1 year until Ford cried foul, and NASCAR's rules forced them off the track. The years after 1970 were not kind to the muscle car, the Roadrunner in particular.
Three things contributed to the death of the muscle car: the oil embargo, where OPEC shut off the spigots, the ever-tightening insurance industry regulations on muscle cars, and the emission standards that all cars had to meet.
Like an old athlete, the 71 Roadrunner gained weight and lost a step or two. Its new base engine was now a lower compression 300 horse 383. To make up for the loss of power, Plymouth made the graphics larger and added more comfort options, but it wasn't the same car. Roadrunners existed in this new body style until 1974. The last standard power plant was the 318.
The muscle car market itself had peaked by 1970, was on the decline, and the Roadrunner was one of the victims. In 1978, I believe, they tried to restore the name and hang it on a Volare as a trim package, which was not a good idea. And but the glory days for the Roadrunner were most certainly 1968 to 1971.
It ended gradually. Each year, horsepower and compression ratio were down, performance was down, and I lived through that era. I was involved with the muscle cars of that era, and it wasn't something that we noticed taking place. It happened so gradually over about a 5 or 6 year period of time that all of a sudden one day we woke up and realized that muscle cars don't exist anymore, yet we had never seen it happen.
The Roadrunner lives as maybe the single most memorable car of the muscle era. It hit while the horsepower war was at its very hottest, and it made the whole world stop and take notice. And even these days, when you hear a little and hear a blast of acceleration, you know it's a Roadrunner. Thanks for watching, and please remember, don't crush them, restore them.